It's time for the Charlotte FC podcast. All right, welcome to the Charlotte FC podcast. I'm Nick Finelli, your host. Today we have the privilege of having Will Martin, and I'm going to let Will introduce himself. Hello, Will.
Hey, Nick, how's it going? I'm happy to be here. I've been on the back end a lot of these podcasts, but happy to be talking to you in front of the camera. So my name is Will Martin. I am the communications coordinator here at Charlotte FC. So essentially what I do is I manage all of our day-to-day supporting communications for the club. So that means media relations, any interview requests that are coming in for our coaching staff and our players. I'm managing those, as well as your typical media availabilities, press conferences, press releases, media advisories, those types of things. And I also run all of our media operations at Bank of America Stadium. So do a little bit of everything on the sporting day-to-day. I'm originally from this area. I grew up in Rock Hill and Fort Mill, South Carolina, went to college and played D2 college soccer at Queen's University of Charlotte, and then started with Charlotte FC in August of 2021 and helped build out our expansion year from having about 3 players, building up a whole roster, and then doing the inaugural year. And yeah, so coming up in just about a month, I'll come up with my three-year anniversary.
Wow, that's interesting. And when you described your job, a lot of it is writing. Were you always a writer? Because, I mean, some people wouldn't go towards that kind of field if they're like, I don't know if I'm good at writing.
Yeah, I think I've always been a strong writer, strong reader. I grew up with a big love of reading, kind of instilled in me from my mom from a very young age. And so I remember going to the library as a, elementary schooler, a middle schooler, and just walking over to the YA section and walking out with just like 2 stacks of books, right? And then come back and bring back 1 stack after 2 weeks and renew the others. And I just had a book with me all the time. And I think that being a lifelong reader really helps your writing ability, expands your vocabulary. It just allows you to understand sentence structure and flow and all of those things at a more innate level. So writing's always come really easy to me. Literature classes and English classes in high school and college were always like my passion points and always really easy for me. Whereas math and science, I was fine at. I was a good student. School worked pretty well for me, but I hated them. I hated numbers and they just didn't make sense to me. Whereas reading and writing came very second nature. So that's always been a strong suit of mine. I majored in communications in college because I wanted something a little more general. I thought at a time about doing a lit major or something like that, but it just didn't feel like it had as many career paths to go forward from as communications did.
So when I was that's really cool. I remember my kids, we used to bring a wagon and like they just put all the books in the wagon and we'd wheel it home. Like that was the big thing. But so when you choose kind of to go into the communications field, and did you know like soccer was the interest, or was it just sports? Like, because you played soccer, but like where did that come in?
Yeah, I think soccer for me was where I wanted to end up coming out of college. Soccer's always been a passion of mine. Major League Soccer has always been a passion of mine. We can get into that later as well. And I knew I wanted to stay involved with the game coming out of college. I knew my ceiling was as a D2 college soccer player. I didn't feel like I had the ability to go further, and nor did I have the desire to go further. Got to a point, you've played soccer straight through for 2 decades and you've just put a lot of your life into playing at a competitive level. And there comes a time when you decide, all right, I'm ready to focus on other things. I'm ready to move on with my life, but I wasn't ready to let go of soccer. So I was always very invested in trying to find a job in soccer. And as I did internships and shadowing and volunteer opportunities and those types of things, it quickly became apparent to me that communications departments at a professional club were a really good fit for me because I was able to take a lot of the skills that I have as a strong communicator, strong writer, and merge those with the soccer knowledge I have, being a lifelong Major League Soccer and American soccer fan, and also my ability to like navigate locker rooms navigate cultures. So our D2 soccer team at Queens was very international heavy, very multicultural. And so there's a lot of unwritten rules that happen in and around a locker room and in around a high performance team that you have to be able to navigate and you have to learn as you go. And so I just had a lot of these soft skills that seemed to line up well to be successful in a communications department at a professional club. And luckily I got the opportunity with Charlotte FC straight out of college, and the rest is history. So
how important was it that you were there when it first started, as opposed to coming into a position or something that somebody else has already done and laid out? Did you feel more agency and control?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the beauty. I think we were able to attract a lot of talent as a club early on, because people coming in, you don't get the opportunity to build something from scratch like that very often. You don't get a blank slate in professional sports, or really anywhere, unless you're doing a big startup. Mm-hmm. So that opportunity was really intriguing for a lot of people. Obviously, it was intriguing for me more because of the passion, more because I'm from Charlotte. The idea of what it would have meant for me as a 10-year-old to be able to come to Bank of America Stadium and see Major League Soccer in person, like that would have made such a big difference for me as a little kid. There was nothing when I was a kid from a Major League Soccer standpoint, right? No Nashville, no Atlanta, no Charlotte, neither of the Florida teams. So there was nothing in the Southeast.
You were an RSL fan, right?
I was an RSL fan growing up. Yeah. I was 10 years old in 2009 when they went on their Cinderella MLS Cup run and won a couple penalty shootouts after being the last seed in the playoffs. And that was my first, like, really early memory watching soccer on TV seriously. And I remember watching those playoffs with my dad. I remember watching that final. It was at what was then CenturyLink Stadium, the Seattle Sounders home stadium. It was a neutral venue back then. It was between the Galaxy and RSL. And I just remember, like, I had this clear memory of the teams walking out for the game, and the Seattle Sounders fans were there. It was full. It was 70,000 people in that stadium, and they were doing their Seattle Sounders back and forth across the stadium. And I just remember being sort of in awe of that. And then became an RSL fan and followed RSL for, 5, 6, 7 years as I was through middle school and high school. But that was so disconnected from me. I didn't get to go to an RSL game in person until I graduated high school. I went out for a trip with my aunt. We went to a game.
Oh, nice.
But just that touch point, that connection, the inspiration you get from that is so cool. So anyways, to circle back to the question, that was really cool for me to be able to then build something that I knew 10-year-old, 12-year-old Will would have been just over the moon about.
Yeah.
And I still get that a little bit sometimes when I'm finishing up and I'm finishing up a game and I'm walking off the field with some of the players and we're going towards post-match media availability, and I'll walk through the tunnel where all the players will stop and sign autographs and stuff. And you'll just see the kids that are just freaking out because Christian Kalina signed their shirt or their forehead or whatever.
Right.
And it really grounds me and makes me remember, like, oh man, I would have been one of those kids if this had all just happened a decade earlier. And it reminds you why you're doing it. But, I think for me, when I started back in August of 2021, I was very green. I was straight out of college. Mm-hmm. You just don't know what you don't know. I mean, I'm coming into an office for the first time, really, right? Like,
right.
My boss.
You've been a student for your whole life.
Yeah, right. My boss is having to teach me some basic stuff, right? Like, I'm trying to figure out how to schedule a meeting on Outlook and add the Teams function into it. Like I'm that's what I'm doing early on, right? Like I'm really trying to get my feet under me for that first 6 months. And then once we finally got to the year, I kind of had figured it all out and got more and more responsibility, but I wasn't as involved with the bigger decisions and the direction we were taking just because I was so entry level and so green at that point. So
when you talk about decisions and things like that, what kind of decisions are you a part of?
And now at this point? Yeah. I mean, I think for me, my biggest responsibility that affects things is just working with our players. Daily and weekly, I'm working with journalists and from a national standpoint, international standpoint, local, and trying to figure out, okay, what one-on-ones are we placing? who are we putting on this week's press conference, who's doing post-game media availability. Because what you don't want to happen is you don't want guys to feel overloaded. You don't want them to feel like they're in positions that's uncomfortable for them. But you also need them to do things, and you can't just let them not sit around and not do anything, because we need to tell the story of the team. We need to increase brand recognition. We need to sell tickets. We need to accomplish these business objectives. And so I'm always striking the balance between what we need to do from a storytelling standpoint from the PR department, and then what's best for the players as human beings, and best for their life balance, and what stories we want to tell, and how do we protect them and elevate them. So that would, I think, be the biggest difference I'm making, the biggest decisions I'm making on a day-to-day basis that really impacts what the general fan sees on a day-to-day basis.
And it's just things like, hey, Woody Wilder, the director of communications, come to him and you say, hey, we want to focus on so-and-so because, been getting a lot of either playing time or, like Tiger Smalls or somebody else, Pekovic, who's starting to get more insertion into the lineup. Is that something you like kind of key in and be like, okay, how do we get this out?
Definitely. Yeah. Me and Woody are talking pretty constantly about the bigger picture and what we need to accomplish and what is the primary objective. So like, for example, during May, we had 4 home games throughout May on every Saturday of May. So the biggest objective for us during May was we need to get people to the stadium. We need to keep reminding people that there's games every Saturday. We want people to buy tickets. We want that stadium to be full to both achieve our business objectives and give us a sporting advantage, right? We want a good home crowd so that the team on the field does well. And so every decision that we were making during May was really focused on, okay, how can we always be directing people back to, there's a home game on Saturday. There's a home game on Saturday. Come out to Bank of America Stadium. Come to Uptown Charlotte for the game. And so you're always thinking about that. Whereas if we've got a lot of away games, okay, maybe we take a step back and we go, all right, a lot of away games, don't need to really focus on slinging tickets or getting people to the stadium right now. Let's have a think. Whose story have we not told well so far? Or who's having a bit of a breakout? Or who, let's look back at the interviews we've scheduled over the last 2 months, the press conferences we've done. Who feels underrepresented right now? Let's make sure that we're getting all of our player stories out there equally. So those conversations are happening pretty constantly between myself and Woody and the rest of our communications department.
So what is the challenge? Because you talked about all those home games and of course away games, but what about when you're not playing? For example, we're going to have Leagues Cup. It's a possibility we're 2 and out, and you got three weeks, almost 25 days that you might not have any soccer at all, any Charlotte FC. So what are you doing then?
It's an opportunity to sometimes. I think the key point of that is obviously in that scenario, we'd be out of Leagues Cup, which isn't ideal for us, right? We'd like to go as far as we can in that competition. But if we get eliminated and we have that gap, you need to look at it as big of an opportunity as possible. So normally, especially in the summer, we've got a lot of midweek games. Stuff is coming thick and fast, and that makes scheduling challenging, right? If we've got a game Wednesday, game Saturday, game Wednesday, game Saturday, well, the players are, if you're a starter, you're playing 90 minutes. You're training Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, playing Wednesday, Saturday. And I'm trying to find little windows of time where I can get Patrick Ajiman to drive down to a local television studio to do an interview, right? And I need to be cognizant of how much time I'm asking from these players. So if we get a 3-week, 2.5-week break like that because we get eliminated from Leagues Cup, then that's good. That now gives us a nice little window of time that we can set up some good human interest stories. We don't have quite as much urgency because there isn't like a game right around the corner that we need to sell tickets for. So now we've got some space to maybe take on some more creative pitches, right? We don't need to just focus on like Pat's performance at the last game, looking ahead to Houston on Saturday. We can take a step back. Maybe someone locally has a creative pitch for us to dive deeper on some element of Patrick's story as a human being, or maybe we have an idea of like, hey, this one guy and he's got some sort of interesting narrative that we feel hasn't been told, but it's going to take some time to tell, and maybe someone needs to come shoot some B-roll of them doing that activity, and that gives us a window of time to do some more interesting human interest stories like that. So those are the kinds of things we'd be focusing on, as well as for us. I mean, the season's long. For me, I travel to every away game, I work every home game, and I travel with the team to all of preseason. So for me, my season started on the second week of January when we left for preseason. I was away from home for pretty much all the half of January and most of February. I was on the road for 6 to 8 weeks just in preseason with the guys, going to training every day and executing some media availabilities.
Right.
And then I came back and it was straight into the season, and you're just game every single week. And so if you get that little 2.5 week break in the summer, that's pretty valuable from a work-life balance standpoint. Is I could get a 2-week break here where it's like, okay, I've got my weekends. Like, I don't normally get weekends. I don't normally get a Saturday night to hang out with friends or do a camping trip over the weekend or something like that. And so that's one thing I'll credit Woody for. He's done a really great job of creating a good work-life balance for our team and making sure that we all understand how many hours we're putting in, how many weekend trips we're doing. And when we have opportunities to take time off and there's a little less pressure around a game just around the corner, he's very willing to work with us and make sure that we can take that time to refresh, get back into a good mental state, come back into the building for the final push, and then hopefully a big, long playoff run through December.
Yeah. You talked about, just for example, having a player go to a TV station or being set up for an interview. What do you do to prep that player for those things? Because obviously you have to talk to the media or whoever's, even like Pat going to compare foods or something like that. You got to talk about like, you're going to be asked this stuff, or we're going to say this, like, what do you do to prep them?
That's an interesting question. And I think depends on the PR department you're talking to sometimes. I think for us, the overall philosophy for us is that we don't want to flood or inundate our spokespeople, whether that's players, coaches, executives, with a ton of talking points, a ton of prep documents, a ton of things to be thinking about. Because I think we've all watched like your typical NFL head coach press conference and your classic coach speak. And everyone sees through that. Everyone knows that it's coach speak. They know that they're just sticking to the talking points and just saying the things that their PR department told them to say. For us as a PR department, when possible, we want our players, coaches, executives to be themselves when they're doing media. We want their personality to be able to shine through. So I'm always very cautious. I don't want to overly prep players when they're going into something so that they're always thinking like, oh, what did Will want me to say here? It should really be, oftentimes there are maybe a couple points that we want to get across. Like if I'm taking, Patrick Ajiman to a local news station and we've got a game coming up on Saturday, I might be telling them like, oh, hey, just remember like, home game on Saturday, we're trying to put over 30,000 people in the stadium. Just make sure you mention that at some point that you're excited to see the fans come out. And he's like, oh, okay, that makes sense.
That's easy.
Right. Like, or if we've, have had some sort of communication crises going on that they need to understand what's going on. I think a lot of times the players aren't as aware of everything that is going on as people think they might be. A lot of players are very unplugged from social media as much as possible. They might not be aware that something off the field, more tangential to them, is happening that someone might ask them about. And really what I don't want to happen is I don't want Patrick to get asked a question and this is the first time he's heard of it. So I'll probably just give him a heads up on something like, hey, this thing happened. Just a heads up that they're probably going to ask you about it. Not like you need to say this thing, you need to say this thing. Just, hey, they're going to ask you about this. If you don't have any direction, this is what I'd suggest thinking about trying to communicate. But so I think, to give a higher level picture, our philosophy is we don't want people to be overly prepped. We don't want them to not sound like themselves when they're in front of a camera.
Yeah, you want them to be authentic and just like you said, aware of it so that they can say what they want to say, because after all, they're professionals and they're going to have to deal with what they say anyway.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And I think we have a great group of players here that are very experienced. We've got a great coaching staff that's very experienced. We have executives that are very experienced in front of media. They know how to deal with tough questions. They know how to manage these moments. So there might be more prep for me with a more inexperienced player. Like, for example, let's say I'm taking Tiger Smalls on an interview. I might give Tiger Smalls a little more prep because Tiger's a rookie. This is maybe his first time doing more major, impactful media. Whereas someone like Ashley Westwood's been in the Premier League. He's been doing interviews since he was 17 years old, and in a much more hostile media environment in England, where they're always looking for a gotcha headline. They're always looking for a juicy quote. Right. And so he knows how to handle himself. And so I don't need to worry about Ashley Westwood as much as I might need to prep someone like Tiger Smalls or another like inexperienced player, Nimfasha Berkimas, maybe, 16, 17 is his first real, think about what you were as a 16-year-old and how prepared you were to speak in front of a camera. Like, I would not have been very prepared. And so just making sure they feel comfortable. So
that's cool. All right. So you said you travel with the team, you're there game days. So you're there, you're on the road. Can you kind of reverse out and talk about what you'll do, I guess, from match day on a road game and then back it all the way out to maybe the last match we had as far as your duties?
Yep. Yeah. So road games are easy. To be honest, they take up more time just because we'll leave. The team will train typical games on Saturday at 7:30 kickoff. So the team will train on Friday morning in Market in Charlotte at the training facility. They'll eat lunch, and then we'll all pack up and go to the airport, and we'll get on the charter flight right around 2:30 in the afternoon. Depending on the length of that flight, that means we're getting to the away city in mid to late afternoon. Land, grab some dinner here, and then it's pretty much free night, free morning all through the next day. So that's kind of an opportunity for us as a staff to, if you haven't been to the away city before, it's a fun opportunity to be able to explore a new city. And that's been a really fun aspect and side benefit of my job, is getting to see a lot of cities across the US and traveling for free. Limited time, obviously, but you do get to see some interesting things. You stay in some hotels that are very central to a lot of and very walkable to things. We'll leave for the stadium with the equipment team and the content team around this afternoon, around 2 p.m. We'll get to the stadium so that equipment and medical can set up everything in the locker room and the treatment room. The content team will get into the stadium and shoot all of the arrivals, stadium scenics and players arriving and those types of things. And then I'll get in, and we typically have a dedicated room for an away post-match press conference. So I'll set up our backdrop, make sure camera and everything's prepped for that for post-game. And then it's a lot of downtime. If there's any requests for broadcast interviews, I'd be handling those either pre-match, halftime, or post-match. Right. And then otherwise it's just getting in post-match. I'm really here for 1 hour of chaos post-game. That is the whole reason I'm traveling with the team, is as soon as the game ends, we're executing on-field interviews with the Apple TV broadcast on MLS Season Pass. And then I'm going into my post-game room. I'm getting head coach Dean Smith in front of the camera, zooming back to our local journalist back in Charlotte. He's answering 10 minutes of questions. And then I'm going in the locker room. I'm finding our player of the match, and I'm bringing him in, and he's speaking. And then pretty much as soon as that player is finished speaking, we are getting the heck out of there so that we can get on the charter flight and get home as soon as possible. So then it's a huge rush to break the backdrop down, break all the camera equipment down, pack everything up, grab some food on the way out, and get on the bus straight to the airport, get on the plane, and then we're, back between 1 and 3 a.m. East Coast time in Charlotte, and straight back to my house and sleep for a little bit, and then have my Sunday off and back in the office on Monday. So, overall, away games are pretty much a breeze. I'm just here for that post-game chaos. And it's chaotic, and I have to execute a lot of things, and I'm only one person. So if there are multiple things, if we have journalists traveling to those away games. We'll try to get them players in person. So I'm trying to handle the Apple request, the press conference, the in-person journalist. And so I'm trying to sort of be 3 places at one time over the course of that hour, but you always end up figuring it out. And then the flip side of that is home games. So home games are a whole lot different because you're responsible for a lot more from a media operations standpoint. So I run all of our media operations at Bank of America Stadium, which basically means I'm running all of our areas that our credentialed media are going to be utilizing during the game. So that is, for the most part, the press box, where you're going to have your traditional written journalists hanging out, watching the game, writing up their post-match recap, or preparing for their post-match podcast, or whatever it might be. Mm-hmm. And then we've got field level, where all of our field level photographers and videographers are going to be shooting the game. And then photo workroom, post-match press conference room, all of these things. So all of these things take setup time, right? Our media gates open about 3 or 4 hours before kickoff. So we're there 5 or 6 hours before kickoff with a whole team of match day workers. We employ about 8 people per game that just help me set everything up. That's name cards and chairs in the press box. That's setting up our backdrop and our table and our chairs and the whole press conference setup for post game, photo workroom, making sure that's all prepped and ready. Making sure we have a checklist for all the photographers that were expected so we can hand out bibs to them. So there's like a lot of moving pieces that happen for a bunch of credential media to come in to cover a game. So I'm very operations focused. Then during the game, it's very much more relaxed. There's not much to happen. And then it's the same thing. Right. At home, it's just more in-person media than it is virtual. So there's 2 hours at home of post-match media availability chaos, head coach press conference, a bunch of player availability outside of our locker room. And then you're coming back in, you're syndicating that out to any media that weren't there so that they can run it and then get home. So I'm probably leaving the stadium for these 7:30 kickoffs. I'm typically leaving the stadium somewhere between 11 p.m. and midnight is when we're finally getting out of Bank of America Stadium and wrapping everything up.
Of course, the content team staying there to 2 or 3 to get stuff out too.
Yeah, sometimes the content team's turning around video edits and stuff like that, and they're I think people don't think about that sometimes, but when you get a video edit come across your Twitter timeline at midnight, that means someone on our video team was sitting in the bowels of Bank of America Stadium churning that video edit out for the last hour, right after the final whistle.
Right, or even if you get it at 8 a.m, it's because they worked at the end of the game to get that ready, so it was scheduled to post.
Yeah, when we're
coming in at 6 to do it again.
Yeah, when we're coming back from these away matches that we win, our team photographer Taylor Banner sits on the airplane the entire time, and she'll shoot over 1,000 photos in a single game. So she's editing, tagging, and uploading all of these photos so that when the players wake up on Sunday morning, they have all these photos available to them they can post from the game. And our social team has all these photos available to start posting. And then our video team sitting on the airplane, churning out video edits, logging all of their footage, tagging all of their footage. There's a lot that goes into that social media stuff.
Yeah. You talked about the decisions being difficult. I've been to a few away matches, did not go so well for the team. And it's hard to get players to want to come and talk about it, but they know they have to do it. How do you manage that? That sounds like a tricky thing.
Definitely the trickiest part of being in professional sports comms. This job is 95% relationship based. So, I am always leaning on the personal relationships I have with people around our team when you're in a tough moment. So there's a big reason why I go to all of preseason with the first team. Number one, we have press conferences and media availabilities that we have to execute throughout that time. So someone needs to be there to execute those things. But outside of those, I'm spending just a lot of time getting to know people, talking to players outside of, getting coffee with guys in the morning, talking to them before and after training, just being in and around so that they know who I am. They know what my job is. They know what I do and why it's important. And you get to take that time with them to help them understand that. And so those relationships are extremely important when I have to then walk into the locker room after, if you just got drubbed 3-0 on the road, everyone's pretty pissed. People are throwing cleats at the lockers, depending on where you're at in the season. And you need to be able to walk in there and, guys need to be able to trust you, that you're not just throwing them to the wolves. And they need to understand why the ask is important. Why is it important that I speak post game? Why does this actually make a difference? What does this do for my reputation? What does this do for the team's reputation? All of those things. Luckily for us here at Charlotte FC, we have a really experienced team with a lot of guys that have been around the block that really know what they're doing. And Ashley Westwood in particular, as captain of the team, sets a really excellent example. Me and Westy have a bit of a joke right now where if we lose or draw, or if it's a draw that's not a great result, sometimes you have draws that feels like wins.
It's like, I'll take this, right?
Yeah. We have a joke right now that all I have to do is walk in the locker room and I'll just make eye contact with Westy. And he's like, yeah, I'm coming, mate. I'm coming. I'll be there in a second. Right. I don't even have to put the ask in anymore. Cause he knows that as captain of the team, when things go poorly, he's going to be the spokesperson that we're often going to lean on, either him or some other more experienced players that are on the leadership team. So that's just part of the job, right? It's great when you win, but it sucks when you lose. And we need Ashley Westwood to step up there and, maybe sometimes calm the things down. We know he can sit in front of a camera and not freak out and, reflect on the positives and take ownership of what needs to be taken ownership of. And he knows how to manage those big moments. And so me having a good relationship with Westy makes those asks a lot easier.
Yeah, and he's also able to talk about those players who may have had an impact or, a negative impact, and talk about them in a way that, shows he understands, that didn't go right for them, but also, like you said, putting the positive on it, because like we always say in soccer and any sports, there's another game,
Yeah.
It's gonna
exactly. Yeah. And sometimes it's interesting, right? You're always balancing the need to, these players are under a microscope, right? They're under a lot of pressure. But they also are paid to do this job. And part of this job is being a public figure and being a face of the club. And so you're sort of, as my job, I'm always balancing protecting these guys from bad situations where their reputation could be seriously impacted or they could be put in a bad spot on camera, versus I also need to make them do what they're paid to do, right? I need to get guys in front of camera at the end of the day. And so I'm always sort of balancing those two things, trying to find the middle ground. So sometimes I'll err on the side of protecting a player if things have gone poorly for them.
If they're not ready to handle it, because if they're ready to handle it, you want them to be in front of everybody.
Exactly. Yeah. If they're ready to handle it, let's go in front of a camera. Let's do it. And maybe sometimes it's just not the right time. You are out there for 90 minutes. Adrenaline is very high. Emotions are very high. And then I'll come in the locker room 10 minutes after. Sometimes you haven't really come down from that emotional high. Things were really tense at the end of a game. And so sometimes the guy's just not ready. Sometimes he just needs 10 minutes, right? And sometimes he just is like, hey, man, just let me go shower and then let's talk. Right. And then let's see if I've calmed down and figured it out. Or sometimes it's like, hey, man, I know that was tough today. Something's gone wrong for you, whatever. Maybe let's not have you speak post-game. Let's let you calm down a little bit. But if you're not going to speak post-game, I do need you to speak on Tuesday before training at the player availability, because I need you to speak. But maybe just right now, the emotions are too high. Let's circle back at a time when it's a little more calmed down and you can speak with more clarity and more grace, and don't put yourself in a bad spot. So you're always sort of balancing those things, which is interesting for sure.
Now, on the other side of things, you have coaches that you've had to work with and deal with, especially more on the road. I know Woody does a lot of the communications with presenting or having the coach there. So what do you do on the road with Dean and previous coaches?
Yeah. Basically what you see Woody doing at home games is what I'm doing on away games. So it's a bit interesting, right? Because you're running a Zoom and Woody is typically on the Zoom. So we'll sometimes go back and forth. Sometimes I'll moderate the press conference. Sometimes Woody will moderate the press conference if I need to go into the locker room to go find our player of the match to bring him in after Dean and get the timing to work out and all of those things. So, but yeah, I mean, Dean knows that he speaks post game. So all I have to do is just stand right outside the locker room and wait for him to chat to the team. And then he comes out and finds me and we go to the Zoom. We have a bit of a routine at this point.
Have you ever had a time where you had to talk to the coach ahead of time saying, hey, I know they're going to be asking about that because they may not have been aware of something?
Yeah, definitely. That's a pretty consistent thing that we'll do. Dean will typically come through, and as we're walking to the press conference, he'll be like, everything okay? And I'll flag one or two things to him if they need to be flagged, just so that he's prepped and ready. And ready for things. Sometimes rumors start breaking on social media about this player's coming, that player's leaving, whatever. And it becomes a big thing on social media, but Dean's been focused on game prep all day. He's coached a game. He has no idea those things are going on. So just a simple heads up like, hey, Dean, this rumor's flying on Twitter right now. Just be prepped. It's a big story. And, Carol or Sam or Nick Finelli or someone's going to probably ask you about it in the post-game Zoom. So just have to think about that while we walk. And pretty casual. It's not like, let's sit down for 10 minutes and prep before this press conference. It's typically as we walk from the locker room to the post-game press conference room, quick flags on a couple of things, talk through anything we need to talk through, get in front of the Zoom, let's get it done.
Yeah, that's cool. All right. Did you, I'm going to kind of switch back to some more personal stuff than about your job. So grew up in Rock Hill area, went to Nations Ford High School. You played what position?
Well, I was a midfielder when I was a bit younger. So I played as like box-to-box midfielder / winger throughout my high school and club career. But I played right back in college. So sort of went backwards to more towards defending. I was definitely a better right back at a higher level, but yeah.
That's cool. And then did you have something that sparked your interest in soccer when you were little as a player, or was it just like everybody else, like your parents put you out there and you play and it's fun and you just keep going? Or was there like, I want to do this?
Yeah, I don't think there was any crazy moment for me growing up. My dad played soccer as a kid, and so pretty early on as a 4-year-old, 3-year-old, you're out there playing rec soccer with your dad as the coach. And so pretty much the same as anyone else, I started playing that. I think my parents put me in T-ball one year, and I played 1 year of that. And I was like, I'm not super interested in that. Played flag football one summer and wasn't super interested in that. So we tried a couple other things, but it was always kind of soccer straight away. So it's kind of interesting because I don't really have real memories of those times of like not being interested in T-ball, right? Like you're 5-6 years old. You don't really remember those things. So I've really just been playing soccer for as long as I can remember.
So at what time or what moment maybe did you say, you know what, I want to be in this career? Like I knew you talked earlier about, you kind of reached your point as far as playing, but when were you like, hey, there's jobs in this. I want to be a part of this still.
Yeah, I think I went into college really having no idea what I wanted to do. I was going to be a business major, and then I switched to communications, and I really didn't have any idea what was going to be happening post-college. I think I thought for like my freshman and sophomore year of college that I was going to get into coaching. I thought I was going to get into youth soccer. Maybe I had grand ideas of being on the administrative side of a youth soccer club or something like that. And so I was coaching my JV team at Nations Ford High School, my alma mater, and coaching a local middle school and getting my coaching badges. So I was kind of tracking towards some of that. And then I think the big change for me was the summer before my junior year. This was, I think, the genesis of my career as it is now. The Gold Cup in 2019 was coming to Charlotte. We had group stage games in Charlotte. And an email blast went out to a bunch of local colleges, and they were just looking for match day volunteers to run media operations, completely unpaid. And I was going into my junior year. I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do. One of my friends forwarded me the email and said, hey, this seems like something you might be interested in. And I figured I kind of want to go to these games anyways, and I don't have the money to. So
Right.
if nothing else, this is a free ticket to the game. It's a free way into the stadium.
Right.
So I signed up and I showed up, and I was on a volunteer team of 15 or 20 high school and college age kids that were working these Gold Cup games under Gabriel Gabor, who is senior national communications consultant at the league office for Major League Soccer. And he runs a lot of major media operations. So MLS Cup, MLS All-Star, all the Mex Tour games that come through the U.S., he sort of heads up media operations for all of those games. So he was running these Gold Cup games as a venue press officer, a VPO. And I walked in and found the whole thing really fascinating. I think a lot of the other people that I was on that volunteer team with did not realize or understand the opportunity that was in front of them, the person they were working with, the event they were working, and how much of a foot in the door moment it was. And I think I did. And I realized what an opportunity I had that kind of stumbled into. And so I really did my best to go above and beyond that day. And I just shadowed Gabe around. I watched him explain jobs to other people that weren't my job. I just asked a ton of questions, tried to be as professional as possible, tried to do as much as possible. And then there was a really interesting moment sort of towards the end of the game, when you get to that point when things are starting to wrap up, and a couple of other volunteers walked up and gave their business cards to Gabe. We're like, hey, I want to stay connected. And I figured, I was like, I'll wait for a more personal moment to do this a little bit later. I don't want to just be one of 10 guys handing my business card. And about 5 minutes later, we were sitting next to each other in the press box, and he just like casually slid his business card next to me. And he was like, you're doing a really great job. I'd really love to work with you again in the future. Like, make sure we stay in touch. And I was like, oh, whoa.
Yeah.
So then I knew he was doing MLS All-Star down in Orlando that same summer, about a month later. So I shot him an email a couple of days after that Gold Cup game. And I said, hey, great to work with you. I know you're doing All-Star. I know you probably already have a volunteer team, but regardless, if you have space, I would love to come down. You don't need to pay me. I'll pay my own way. I can drive down from Charlotte. I'll get a cheap Airbnb. I just want the experience. And he was like, yeah, my volunteer team's full, but if you want to come shadow me for the full week and just be my volunteer assistant, come on down. So I went down and I stayed in the sketchiest Airbnb ever. I hope my mom doesn't listen to this podcast, but I was like, $30 a night Airbnb. It was basically someone's house, and they'd taken like their dining room and just like curtained it off and just put a bed in there. And it was really sketchy. It was not a good part of town. I was walking like 2.5 miles to get to the stadium every day to work these events, just like in the Orlando summer heat. Yeah. I was showing up with like a bag over my shoulder and having to go into the stadium bathroom and like wipe down with like paper towels and then like clean off and put deodorant on before I like put my suit on for the game.
Just to be presentable. Yeah,
exactly. It's just like, it was kind of crazy. But thankfully Gabe gave me the opportunity and we struck up a really good relationship. He really liked me. And then from there, my eyes really opened to the fact of, oh wow, like there's a whole ecosystem of journalists and PR professionals that are covering this game at a high level, this game that I love. And these are all skills that I have. These are all things that I can do. I'm a good communicator. I'm a good writer. I'm very organized. I'm good at like running operations on a match day. I'm good under pressure. And so I was like, wow, this is something I could do at a high level. And this could really be my ticket into like contributing to the growth of American soccer, and which is something I really want to do. So then from there, it was really all in on like, okay, how can I work for a professional soccer team in a communications department? I kept getting experience with Gabe. Gabe brought me back for during the pandemic. I went down and worked the bubble tournament down in Orlando, the MLS is Back tournament. So me and Gabe spent 30 days together just running media ops for the like limited amount of journalists that were allowed to cover in person, just sweating our butts off with masks on in 90-degree Orlando summer heat. And he brought me back for 2021 Gold Cup. I worked in MLS Cup with him. So he just gave me a ton of opportunity and really helped push me and really helped develop my resume to a point when I applied for Charlotte FC after graduation. I had both Gabe's recommendation and the experience that I'd gained throughout that Of
Right.
course, I was doing other things throughout that time. I interned with the Charlotte Checkers in their corporate partnerships department before the pandemic. I interned with a local youth soccer club and worked with their USL League Two team. So I was doing other stuff as well. Obviously, it wasn't all just
Right.
this, but that was really my like foot in the door moment. And then
Uh-huh.
I just stuck my foot in the door and kicked the door down and made my
Right.
way through. Right.
Well, you were able
And
to,
I,
like you said, you were able to see the opportunity, whereas like some people just
yeah,
didn't know that, and you took advantage of it knowing that. Did you get paid
yeah.
for those back in MLS, or was that also volunteer?
So then once Gabe brought me back, he brought me to MLS's back in Gold Cup 2021 as a full assistant venue press officer and a VPO, and that was paid at that point,
Nice.
which was great. So once I kicked the door down, then I found the paid opportunities, and that was really good. So that's a long story, obviously, but I think it's really indicative of, for better or for worse, how the sports industry operates. It is an industry that you sometimes need to have the connection.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes you can gain those connections through hard work, through recognizing the opportunity in front of you. I think back to those 2019 Gold Cup games a lot. And I think back to the 15, 20 other volunteers that were with me that had the same exact opportunity that I did. And I was able to leverage that first opportunity into so much more
Mm-hmm.
that I think some other people that were there just didn't recognize how much that opportunity could snowball into more. So I tell people that all the time whenever I'm speaking to classes, or I'm trying to give it, or someone's calling me wanting advice how to get into the industry.
Right.
I'm just always telling them that you don't know which opportunity or which person you meet is going to be the foot in the door moment. So you need to approach everything with so much professionalism and so much like gusto, so that when the right person comes across your path or the right opportunity comes across, you're putting your best foot forward and you're taking full advantage of it. So yeah, that's kind of the lesson of my journey into sports.
And some sacrifices. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
you had to, put yourself out there on a volunteer basis and just know like this might not turn out to anything,
Yeah.
but you're going to put yourself out there and see if it works.
And I think also, one thing I'm very cognizant of as well is, I think we have, very generally speaking, a representation problem at times in the professional sports industry because of the environment that sports is. It's underpaid, it's overworked,
Right.
And a lot of times it takes volunteer opportunities, unpaid internships to break your way in. And I think that creates a lot of problems that's a conversation for a different podcast than this one.
Right.
But for us at Charlotte FC, all of my match day workers are paid match day workers. So I don't want someone to not feel like they can have their foot in the door opportunity and having to be like sacrifice a shift at work to pay their bills in order to take the opportunity. Like I want it at least to be paid. Like it's not paid a lot, but it's paid at least. And you're at least not just wasting your time throwing away volunteer hours trying to get into the industry. So that's a topic that you could have a whole hour-long podcast about, obviously, but we're trying to do our best to bridge that gap where I can.
No, that's great. So what would you like to do that you haven't done yet? Big picture, you could be at Charlotte FC forever and you love what you're doing, but there's probably big things out there that you're like, this would be nice too.
Yeah. It's a good question. Honestly, Nick, it's been something I've been thinking about recently is like, what do I want out of my career? And I think work-life balance comes into that equation a lot. The further you climb the ladder, the worse your work-life balance is going to get, just because you're going to have more responsibility. You're going to have more things to do, more expectation placed on you. So I think big picture, I'd love to lead a department one day. I'd love to climb the ladder and be a director of communications. But I also value my life outside of soccer and outside of work. I really value time spent with friends. I'm a big runner. So when you ask that question, the things that come to my mind is, I'd love to run all 6 world major marathons. I've checked off 2 of them. I've checked off Boston and New York City.
Oh, nice.
So I'd love to get Chicago, London, Berlin, and Tokyo all done. I think that'd be really cool. I'd love to run an 100-miler one day. I'd love to run Western States 100.
Wow.
And yeah, so I mean, I think sometimes when I think about like where does my life want to go, I think about like, well, I want to have the opportunity to do a lot of these things that excite me. Like I want to have the opportunity to go on a week-long backpacking trip through the Utah national parks. I want to be able to run some world major marathons. I'd love to be able to train and run a 100-mile ultra marathon. And so the question is, how can you balance your career? And what I'm very passionate about here as well, with also wanting to do those things. And do you want to get married? Do you want to start a family? And how do those layers of complexity all end up merging together? It's, it's interesting and hard to project, but yeah.
And it just gets more complex the older you get.
Yeah. It's exactly that. Like if you want to pick your life up and move for an opportunity across the country, the older you get, and when you get married, you have kids, you have other things happening, you've got a mortgage, like it becomes harder and harder to do that thing.
Yeah, it's not
pick
just
up your whole life and take an opportunity. Yeah.
Your decision.
It's not like it was for me coming out of college when I was like, oh, I'll work anywhere. I just pick my life up and go. It doesn't matter. But you add layers of complexity the older you get. Says me, 25 years old, right? Like real rich from the 25-year-old over here.
No, that's good. Yeah, like you said, you were able to see a lot of this in forecast. So that's a lot of maturity on your end just to understand this and know the moment. We talk about players too. Like when players are at that, and they know the moment, they're able to step up. Like that's just how it is. You got to be able to excel in this business. You got to recognize that stuff in any business.
It's stoppage time.
I added a couple for you that I didn't add for others. Is there a stadium or a place? I know you talked about the marathons, but is there a stadium maybe in football that you would like to go to that you haven't?
Yeah, interesting question. I think I would. There's a lot of international stadiums I'd love to go see. I haven't made my way to Europe yet at this point in my life. I think I'd really love to go see a game at Anfield and hear You'll Never Walk Alone. Yeah, I think that would be really, really, really cool. Just growing up, as a kid in the States, you grow up watching Premier League and you see all of these things. So I think I'd love to go to Anfield is probably the top answer.
All right. What was your first job? Not like career job, but just job.
Teenager job. What was my first job? Well, I refereed a lot. Is how I made my money throughout like middle school, high school, and early college. Was I got my referee badge and I refereed on the weekends when I wasn't playing for my club soccer team, which was a good way to make money as a kid. But I think my first refereeing was more of like a freelance gig, and I think now is a valuable thing I've done in my life. It gives me a lot of perspective on a pretty key part of the game. I think I have a lot more empathy for referees than most folks that work for clubs do. So I'm always sort of trying to figure out, I'm always trying to explain away a referee's decision. It's funny, I'm sort of the local referee defender sometimes, but
it's also a communication thing too. It's like even as a, like you said, rec or any type of thing, you have to explain why you called that, what happened. You got these crazy fans. They don't understand what's going on. It's like a lot of education and communication.
Yeah. But I think my first real job, quote unquote, real job was during the pandemic. I worked for Amazon in a warehouse fulfillment center. So I worked for 6 weeks. I did the night shift. I worked 3 12-hour shifts a week. So I kept having to flip my sleep schedule back and forth because I'd have 4 days off and then 3 days on. And I got the job because it was the pandemic and I needed to make some money and I was coming up on graduation and I was just sitting at home. So they paid really well during the pandemic as well because they needed people. But man, that gave me such a respect for just people that grind shift work and grind warehouse work like that over the course of their lives. I mean, it really stuck with me. I had one, you always got swapped around where you were, like which station you were assigned to. And one day I was next to this woman, and I was asking her like, oh, how long have you been here? It was just chatting as we were doing our jobs. And she was saying like, yeah, I've worked here for 7 years. I've been here since this fulfillment center opened. And I was at 4 weeks and already thinking about quitting. Like I was almost done. And I did put my 2 weeks in pretty soon after that. And I burned out of it. I was like, I've made enough money. I'm done. But she'd been working there for 7 years and she loved the shift that she was in because she was like, yeah, she's like, I work nights. I work 3 days a week. And this enables me to pay the bills and spend as much time as possible with my kids.
Right.
I can drop. She's like, I come here. I pick my kids up from school. I drop them off at home and I come here. I work all night. And then I get to pick my kids up from school in the morning. Or I get to,
take them to school.
She's like, take them to school. Yeah. And then she's like, and then I get 4 days off where I get to go to their sporting events and get to do their things. And she's like, this is just the sacrifice I'm willing to make. And me, meanwhile, I was burning out. I was like, I can't do this anymore. This is too hard. And she's got kids at home. I was just going home and going to sleep. So it just gave me a real respect for people that are able to sustain those types of jobs out of love for loved ones and family and paying the bills. And that really kind of changed my perspective on life a little bit, that job.
Cool. Walk-up music.
Walk-up music, man. Right now, I just went to Bonnaroo Music Festival in Tennessee and took a little time off to go there. And the best set was Fred Again on Sunday night. So I'd probably go with a Fred Again song.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Do you have a must-do personal ritual or habit? I know you run every morning, but is there something else?
Yeah, probably. I mean, honestly, I'd probably say running. If I go 2 or 3 days without running, I start to legitimately feel bad because I think it's just as much a physical exercise as it is a mental exercise for me. It can be very meditative and I can get into a big flow state. And it's just nice to unplug. I can listen to a podcast, listen to an audiobook. And so honestly, I'd say running is a pretty daily ritual for me that allows me to reset my mental state.
Speaking of unplugged, totally getting away from any technology, what would you do?
I'd go on a massive through hike backpacking trip. If I had the opportunity to just completely unplug and didn't have any responsibilities and didn't have anything back home I was worried about, I would do something like hike the whole Appalachian Trail or do one of those crazy bike packing trips from Canada to Mexico, or it's always been my dream to do something like that. And I think it would be such a cool life experience, but it's so hard to get that time. I'd have to quit my job to do something like that. Right. And that's sometimes just not a realistic ask, but yeah.
Yeah. Do you have a go-to snack while watching a match?
Man, I think my favorite candy is Skittles, the purple pack, the wild berry Skittles. Those are the best. So maybe those. Okay.
Do you find starting a project or finishing one more gratifying?
Finishing one. Starting projects is scary and hard for me.
Okay. What about design? What impresses you more, the interior parts of design or the exterior parts of design?
As in like a house, like interior design versus exterior
Any
design,
type of design. Design is physical, but it's also, processes.
Yeah. I guess I would say interior design. I think seeing a finished product is cool, but I'm really fascinated with the process of things, the dynamics of things. I think that's why I follow a lot of different types of sports, because I consume so much soccer for my job now that I watch way less soccer in my free time. Right. But before this interview, I was sitting and I had the Tour de France on my laptop and Formula One qualifying on the TV. And what I'm fascinated about is I love finding a new sport that I don't know a lot about and learning all about how it happens, why it happens, the mentality of the riders, the mentality of the drivers, the strategies. And so I find process really interesting is some of that. That's cool.
What recharges you? You don't get much time off. So what are you going to do to recharge when you do have that time off?
I'm a big introvert. So sometimes social situations can wear me out a little bit, and my job is very social and very relationship based. So honestly, just getting home and just spending time with my girlfriend and being able to just like not interact with anybody for a little while. If I really am like feel worn down and burned out and I need to get away from everything, I'll go on a run.
Nice. All right, last question. If you are a current player on Charlotte FC, what player would you most be like?
Nathan Byrne. Easy. Yeah, super easy. Nathan Byrne on the field is really similar to what my style was, just multiple rungs down on the quality level. We're talking about like a pretty average D2 right back. But
the way you approach it and go about it is
Nate's style is very similar to mine. He's just an engine, just gets up and down the line, just very steady, communicates a lot. That was a big part of my game when I played. I was a big communicator. I was a big believer in giving as much information as possible. And Nate's talked about that in the past, about that's a big part of his game. So definitely Nathan Byrne.
Cool. Well, Will Martin, thanks for being on the podcast. I appreciate your time today.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. I really enjoyed it.
That's it for this episode of the Charlotte FC podcast. I hope you enjoyed listening to my conversation with Will Martin. I will tell you one thing about Will. I have noticed firsthand just the effect that he has on the players and that trust and relationship in all of the podcast interviews that we've done and just working with him and with the players. You can just tell right away that he's figured it out. And at such a young age, with all his maturity, sky's the limit for this guy. So all the best of luck to him, and hope you all continue to listen to get behind the scenes and learn about not only people at Charlotte FC, but what people do in the soccer industry and how they make things work and make things happen. This is Nick Finelli with the Charlotte FC podcast. Listen and follow us on CLTFC podcast. Follow us on YouTube as well as X and Instagram. Until next time, enjoy your time.